It started as a bold challenge. Donald Trump, confident and ready to dominate the stage, believing he had the upper hand, the experience, and the crowd right where he wanted them. But within minutes, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett flipped the entire room with nothing but calm precision, unwavering truth, and the kind of clarity that comes from years of fighting battles that don't make headlines. By the fourth question, Trump wasn't just losing the debate, he was visibly searching for a way out, his usual arsenal of comebacks failing him, his confidence slowly crumbling under the weight of her words. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. The lights were blinding, hot against the skin, the kind that make you feel exposed even when you're fully clothed. The cameras were rolling, capturing every expression, every breath, every flicker of emotion, and the air inside the auditorium felt electric charged with anticipation, thick with tension, as if everyone in that room knew they were about to witness something far beyond a typical political exchange. This wasn't your usual political forum. It wasn't another panel discussion filled with scripted answers and rehearsed zingers designed for social media soundbites. No, this was a powder keg waiting for a spark, a moment balanced on the edge of something unpredictable, something raw. And that spark came the moment Donald Trump leaned into the microphone, his eyes locked on the woman seated across the stage, and with all the confidence of a man who believed he owned every room he entered, he said the words that froze the entire auditorium. "You want a real debate? Let's go." The audience gasped. Some leaned forward in their seats. Others exchanged quick glances with the person next to them, caught between shock and anticipation, unsure whether to applaud or hold their breath. There were murmurs, chairs shifted, programs rustled, and all eyes, every single pair, turned toward the woman he had just challenged with such casual arrogance. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She sat there, wearing a crisp navy blazer that fit her like armor. Her hair pulled back, her posture upright and steady. Her expression was one of sharp calm, the kind that doesn't come from being unbothered, but from being utterly prepared. She didn't flinch. She didn't glance toward the moderators, looking for guidance or permission. She didn't look to her team seated somewhere in the wings. No, Jasmine Crockett met Donald Trump's stare head-on, and with a steady voice that cut through the tension like a blade, she answered without hesitation. "I was born ready." The crowd stirred again, this time with something that felt closer to awe, a collective recognition that they were no longer watching a staged event. A moment earlier, this had been a structured panel discussion, but now it had transformed into something no one had expected, a live, unscripted clash between two political forces who couldn't be more different. Trump had been in his usual form all evening. He'd been commanding the room with his trademark bravado, peppering his answers with sharp jabs, controlling the tempo like a showman who knew exactly how to work a crowd. He gestured broadly, leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk, made jokes that landed with his base, and moved through the evening like a man who believed he was untouchable. But he had clearly underestimated who was sitting across from him. Crockett hadn't spoken much up to that point. She listened carefully, took mental notes, calculated her moments, and when the right opportunity presented itself, she didn't just rise to it, she owned it. There was no panic in her eyes, no uncertainty in her body language. She had been a public defender, a woman who had faced hostile judges, aggressive prosecutors, and systems designed to break people who looked like her. This stage, this moment, it was just another Tuesday for her. The moderators looked uncertain, their scripts suddenly useless. This wasn't part of the schedule. There were no rules for what was happening. But with the audience buzzing and cameras capturing every second, they knew better than to intervene. This was no longer their show. Trump sat up straighter in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. He believed he'd put her on the spot. In his mind, he was setting the stage to show dominance and classic strategy. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She leaned back, crossed her legs with deliberate ease, and waited for the first real question. And in that pause, those few seconds of silence before the moderator spoke again, you could feel the shift. the balance of power, the narrative. The entire tone of the evening had changed hands. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to throw Crockett off balance. As a former public defender, she had faced tougher opponents in rougher settings, courtrooms where the stakes were life and freedom, where emotions ran high, and justice felt like a distant dream. She wasn't a stranger to heat. In fact, she thrived in it. Pressure didn't break her. It focused her. Trump, meanwhile, was performing for the room. That's what he knew best. Create a moment, seize attention, deliver a punchline. But this wasn't a rally. This wasn't a crowd built only to cheer him on. It was a mixed audience, curious, skeptical, and ready to listen to whoever could prove they had something real to say. The moderator, still slightly stunned, regained his composure and leaned forward. His voice was cautious, measured. "All right," he said slowly. "If both candidates agree, we'll proceed with a direct debate format. First question coming up." There it was. Official. Trump had opened a door with his challenge, and Crockett had walked right through it without hesitation. But this wasn't just political theater anymore. This was a real-time battle of ideas, experience, and clarity. A clash between two people who represented entirely different Americas. One side brought years of spotlight and spectacle, a lifetime of media attention and billion-dollar branding. The other brought truth born from the ground up, from the courtrooms, where she fought for the voiceless, from neighborhoods overlooked by politicians, from people who felt forgotten. The tension on stage was thick. Trump adjusted his cufflinks and scanned the crowd like he always did, looking for energy to ride. Crockett didn't move. She wasn't looking for energy. She already had it deep inside, rooted in purpose. This wasn't just a clash of parties or policies. It was a confrontation between two entirely different visions of leadership. And the audience, sensing the gravity, leaned in, not because someone yelled louder, but because for the first time that night, they sensed something unpredictable, something raw, something real. Trump may have thrown the first punch with his challenge, but everyone in that room would soon learn that Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to spar. She was there to make a point, and she wasn't going to miss. The first question dropped like a hammer, echoing through the charged silence. The moderator's voice was steady but careful. What does it truly mean to fight for the American people? It was simple in wording, but devastatingly heavy in implication. This wasn't a question about numbers or budgets. This was a test of heart, of experience, of authenticity. A real answer couldn't be memorized from talking points. It had to be felt. Trump went first. He leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table like a seasoned performer. "Nobody," he said with that familiar smirk, "has fought harder for the American people than me." He paused. "I brought jobs back to this country, millions of them. I secured the border when everyone said it couldn't be done. I lowered taxes for hard-working families. I told the world we were done being taken advantage of." Another pause for effect. "I didn't sit in back rooms and write policy papers that nobody reads. I went out and did it. I fought the media. I fought the bureaucrats. I fought for you." Some heads in the crowd nodded. This was the Trump people expected, full of confidence, sure of his legacy. He sat back, satisfied. Then the room turned to Jasmine Crockett. She didn't rush. She simply sat upright, let a slow breath out, and began to speak in a calm, steady voice. "Fighting for the people," she said, "means showing up when no one's watching. It means being there when the cameras aren't rolling. Not to take credit, but to take responsibility." The room quieted even further. She wasn't speaking in slogans. She was speaking in experience. "I grew up in a neighborhood where politicians came by only when it was time to ask for votes. They'd smile, shake hands, take pictures, then disappear the moment the election was over. I remember watching my mom take double shifts at a hospital just to keep the lights on." She paused. "I remember classmates who were smarter than me, more talented, but they never made it because they didn't get the same chances. That's what shaped me. That's what made me understand what fighting for people really means." Her voice didn't waver. Before I ever sat in Congress, I was a public defender. I wasn't making big speeches. I was in courtrooms every single day, trying to keep young black men from disappearing into a system that never saw their humanity. She glanced toward Trump briefly. You say you fought for the people, but you fought from the top, from a position of privilege. I've been fighting from the bottom, from the places where people are too tired to protest, too scared to speak up, too forgotten to hope. That sentence landed hard. There was a beat of silence, the kind that follows something undeniably true. Trump shifted in his seat. His usual retorts didn't seem to fit, because this wasn't a personal attack. Crockett hadn't insulted him. She had simply drawn a line and made it clear where she stood. For some folks, she continued, fighting for the people means writing executive orders from a desk. For me, it means sitting in a cramped apartment with a single mother who's about to lose her kids because she can't afford childcare. It means standing in a church basement with veterans who serve this country but can't get the health care they were promised. It means listening to teachers who spend their own money on school supplies while politicians cut education budgets. The audience was locked in. This wasn't theater. This was testimony. You talk about fighting the media, fighting the establishment, she said, her gaze steady on Trump. I fight for people who don't have the luxury of choosing their battles. I fight for the grandmother rationing her insulin. I fight for the young man who got stopped by police 5 times in 1 month for walking home. I fight for the family that lost everything in a storm and never got the federal aid they were promised. Trump's jaw tightened. He wanted to interrupt. You could see it. But something held him back. Crockett leaned forward slightly. Fighting for the people isn't about credit. It's not about your name on a building or your face on a hat. It's about showing up on the hard days when the cameras are gone. It's about doing the work that doesn't get applause because it's the right thing to do. She paused. And it's about remembering where you came from. Because if you forget where you came from, you forget who you're supposed to serve. The silence that followed was profound. Trump, for once, didn't immediately jump in with a rebuttal. He sat there, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped together. The first question had been answered. But more than that, a tone had been set. This wasn't going to be a debate won by volume. This was about substance, about truth, about who actually understood what it meant to serve the people. The moderator cleared his throat. The second question was coming, and the room held its breath. How do you define accountability in leadership? Trump jumped in almost immediately. Accountability? He repeated. I'll tell you about accountability. When I was president, the economy was the strongest it had ever been. Unemployment was at historic lows. We were energy independent. He gestured broadly. I didn't need focus groups. I didn't need advisors to write my speeches. I made decisions, and I stood by them. That's accountability. That's leadership. He leaned back. Accountability means results, and I delivered results. The rest is just talk. The room waited for Crockett's response. She took a moment, her eyes closing briefly as if centering herself. When she opened them, there was clarity that was almost startling. Accountability, she began slowly, is not just about taking credit when things go well. It's about taking responsibility when things go wrong and actually doing something about it. The audience hung on her every word. When I was a public defender, I represented people who had been failed by the system. And you know what I learned? Accountability means looking someone in the eye and saying, I hear you, I see you, and I'm going to do everything in my power to help you. Her voice was steady. It means showing up to community meetings when it's inconvenient. It means answering tough questions from people who are angry, hurt, or scared. It means admitting when you don't have all the answers, but committing to finding them anyway. She turned slightly toward Trump. You talk about making tough calls and firing people. But accountability isn't about firing people, it's about fixing problems. It's not about blaming the media, it's about listening to the people who trusted you. Trump's expression tightened. Crockett wasn't finished. Real accountability means acknowledging when your policies hurt people. It means recognizing that when you cut health care, real people suffer. When you ignore climate science, real communities get destroyed. When you fan the flames of division, real families get torn apart. The room was electric. I've sat with mothers who lost their sons to gun violence, while politicians offered thoughts and prayers but no action. I've met with small business owners who lost everything during the pandemic, while corporations got billions in bailouts. Her voice didn't soften. And you know what every single one of them asked me? Who's going to be held accountable? Because that's what accountability really means. Someone has to answer for the promises that were broken, the lies that were told, the people who were left behind. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Trump jumped in, his voice sharp. That's easy to say when you've never had to make the big decisions. You sit there and criticize, but you've never had to run a country. Crockett didn't flinch. You're right. I've never been president, but I've been in the trenches. I've been in courtrooms where one decision can mean the difference between freedom and imprisonment. She leaned forward. And here's what I know about accountability, Mr. Trump. It's not measured by the size of your platform. It's measured by the size of your conscience. It's not about how loud you can speak. It's about how deeply you can listen. The silence that followed was stunning. Even Trump seemed momentarily at a loss for words. The moderator glanced at his notes. Third question. But before he could read it, Trump interjected. I want to respond to that. Mr. Trump, the moderator interrupted gently but firmly. You'll have your opportunity with the next question. Trump sat back, clearly annoyed. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically. This wasn't his rally anymore. Crockett remained composed, her hands folded calmly. She wasn't celebrating. She was simply present, grounded, ready for whatever came next. The moderator adjusted his glasses and read the third question with careful precision. If you could speak directly to a struggling working-class family right now, what would you say to them? And more importantly, what would you do for them? The question hung in the air, like a challenge wrapped in simplicity. It demanded real answers, not talking points, but genuine human connection. Trump, perhaps sensing an opportunity, jumped in before the moderator even finished. He pointed at the crowd with that familiar gesture. I'd say this, he began confidently. You were better off when I was in charge. Prices were lower, jobs were up. The world respected us. You had money in your pocket. That's what people care about, not speeches, not emotions, results. He paused, waiting for applause. Some came, scattered, but it wasn't the full wave of support he expected. He kept going, his voice growing louder. People are tired of talk. They want someone who can win, who can bring back the deals, shut the border, protect your neighborhoods. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. That's my promise to you. It was classic Trump, fast, bold, full of punchlines. He ended with that trademark smirk, confident he had connected. Then came Jasmine Crockett's response, and everything changed. She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. She simply folded her hands and said in a voice that carried undeniable truth, You're right about one thing, people are tired. But they're not just tired of talk. They're tired of being lied to. The room froze. The words hung like smoke. You keep saying they were better off under you. Crockett continued, her eyes locked on Trump. But let's talk about that working-class family. Let's make them real instead of theoretical. She leaned forward. Maybe they lived in Texas, where I'm from. Maybe they worked 2 jobs, both parents grinding day and night, and still couldn't afford health insurance. Maybe they had to choose between buying their child's medicine or buying groceries that week. Trump scoffed under his breath, but the microphone caught it. Crockett pressed on. Maybe their rent went up by 30% in 1 year because investors bought up all the affordable housing. Maybe their local school lost funding, and suddenly their child's classroom had 40 kids instead of 20. She paused, painting a vivid picture. Maybe their cousin, the one who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, got laid off when a factory closed, despite all those promises you made about saving American jobs. Trump's face tightened. The smirk had disappeared. He tried to cut in. That's fake. No, sir, Crockett interrupted firmly. This isn't fake. This is what I hear in living rooms across the country. Not at fundraisers with millionaire donors. Not at country clubs. On front porches. In churches. In clinics. Her voice carried quiet passion. I don't need a private jet to understand their pain because I've lived it. I've been the kid whose mom worked 2 jobs. I've been the young person wondering if I'd ever make it out of my neighborhood. She wasn't just debating. She was testifying. And you know what those families want? She continued, her voice rising slightly in conviction. They want truth. They want someone who doesn't just remember them during election season. They want clean water. They want safe streets. They want fair pay. They want dignity. She paused, her next words slower, more deliberate, more cutting. They want a president who sees them, not just his own reflection. That sentence cut deep. It struck at the core of Trump's entire brand. The implication was clear, devastating, that Trump's leadership had always been about Trump. Trump said nothing. He shifted in his seat, his hand twitching toward his water bottle before stopping. He wasn't just silenced, he was stunned. For the first time on that stage, Donald Trump looked like he wanted the moment to end. The man who thrived on attention, who fed off confrontation, he looked like he regretted issuing the challenge. If you were in Donald Trump's shoes right now, facing the raw truth being spoken by Jasmine Crockett, what would you do? Would you double down, or would you listen? Share your thoughts in the comments. Crockett let the silence hang, knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing is simply letting truth breathe. Then, with a softened but strong voice, she continued, I don't have all the answers. I won't pretend I can fix everything overnight or that I have some magic solution. It was humility that contrasted sharply with everything Trump had said. But here's what I will promise. I will never pretend I'm the only one who matters. I will never put my ego above your needs. I will never forget that being elected to lead is not about your name, your brand, or your revenge. She paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in. It's about service. Pure and simple. It's about waking up every single day and asking, how can I help? Not, how can I win? But how can I serve the people who trusted me? The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. People sat frozen, absorbing what they had witnessed. Some had tears in their eyes. Others sat thoughtful, processing the stark difference between the 2 visions of leadership. This was the moment. Trump realized this wasn't just a bad night. This was a mistake, a fundamental miscalculation. He had thrown out a challenge, thinking it would be entertainment, a spotlight he could control. But instead, he had invited someone who wasn't there to play games. Jasmine Crockett had come to speak truth, to represent the voiceless. She didn't just out-talk him. She out-grounded him, out-felt him, out-connected with the very people Trump claimed to represent. And now, all he could do was sit there and regret it. The air had fundamentally changed. Trump, usually so untouchable, seemed smaller, somehow human, slower, less sure of himself. Crockett remained exactly as she had been. Calm, poised, unshaken, grounded in purpose. And there was still one question left. The moderator, now more cautious, glanced between the 2 candidates before reading the final prompt. His voice was quieter, almost reverent. 4th and final question. What do you want the American people to remember about you after tonight? It wasn't about policies or polls anymore. It was deeply personal. It was about legacy, about character, about the mark you leave. Trump leaned into the microphone, his voice noticeably lower than at the start. I want the American people to remember that I fought, he said, and there was something in his tone, perhaps the closest thing to vulnerability anyone had heard. I took on everyone, the establishment, the media, the deep state. I took them all on because I care about this country. He paused. I didn't need to run for president. I had everything. But I did it anyway because I love America. I saw what was happening, and I couldn't stand by." He looked at the camera. "I made America strong. I made it respected, and I'll do it again. That's what I want people to remember." There was no applause, just heavy silence. Trump had delivered his message, but even he seemed unsure if it had landed. He sat back, his expression tight. Then it was Crockett's turn. She didn't hesitate. What she was about to say wasn't something she had to reach for. It was already there, at the core of who she was. "I want the American people to remember that I listened," she began softly. "That I didn't come here to talk about myself, but to speak for those who never get a microphone." Her tone was measured, deliberate. "I didn't grow up with power. I wasn't born into wealth. I've been broke. I've been underestimated. I've had doors slammed in my face." She paused, her eyes moving across the audience. "But I kept going. Not because I'm special. I kept going because I knew that somewhere, someone was waiting for someone like me to stand up for them. Someone who understood their struggle, because I'd lived it." The audience was completely silent. I look out at this audience, and I don't just see faces. I see stories. I see the single mother working 3 jobs. I see the veteran struggling with PTSD. I see the teacher spending her own money on supplies. I see the young person wondering if they'll ever afford the future they've been promised. Her voice didn't shake. "I don't promise everything will be easy. I don't promise to be perfect, but I do promise this, and I mean it with everything in me." She leaned forward. "I will never forget who I'm fighting for. I will never put my name, my image, my ego above the people who trusted me. And I will never back down from doing what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs me." Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in this story, and share your thoughts in the comments. The weight of her words settled over the room, but she wasn't finished. "When the cameras turn off tonight, when the lights dim and the spin begins, I want you to remember this." She paused, letting the moment build. "There's a difference between a performer and a public servant. One lives for applause. The other lives for accountability. One measures success by the size of their crowd. The other measures it by the depth of their impact." That line hit harder than anything that evening. Everyone knew exactly what she meant. She gave a small nod to the moderator. "That's all," she said simply. Trump didn't respond. He didn't interrupt. He simply sat there, hands clasped, lips pressed together. For once, perhaps for the first time in his political career, Donald Trump didn't have the last word. The moderator, clearly aware of the historic nature of what had just transpired, took a deep breath. "I want to thank both candidates for what has been an extraordinary and unprecedented exchange tonight." The stage lights began to dim slowly. The microphones went cold, their green lights fading to black. And the moment, though technically over, stayed with everyone in that room, clinging to them like the weight of something profound. People got up slowly from their seats, not in a rush, but moving as if they were leaving a courtroom after a final verdict. Because that's what it had felt like, a trial of leadership, of character, of purpose. And the outcome was clear in the faces of everyone present. Donald Trump had shown what he always shows: confidence, defiance, boldness. But Jasmine Crockett had done something more, something deeper. She had revealed truth, not the kind you can spin, but the kind that comes from lived struggle, from showing up when it's hard, from meaning every word you say. As the stage emptied and the night drew to a close, one thought hung in the air like a whisper. He had challenged her, confident he couldn't lose, and he never saw her coming. The debate that was supposed to be his moment of triumph had become her moment of truth. The challenge he threw out so casually had exposed not her weakness, but his limitations. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just out-talked Donald Trump that night. She had shown the difference between leadership as performance and leadership as service, between speaking to people and speaking for people, between fighting for your own glory and fighting for those who have no voice. In the hours and days that followed, The debate spread through social media like wildfire. Clips were shared, analyzed, dissected from every angle. But what made this different was the tone of the conversation. It wasn't just partisan talking points. Something deeper was happening. People who rarely agreed on anything were finding common ground in their assessment. Conservative commentators who had spent years defending Trump found themselves struggling to spin what had happened. Liberal voices weren't just celebrating a political victory, they were talking about something bigger, something more fundamental about leadership. In living rooms across America, families who expected typical political theater found themselves having real conversations. Difficult conversations. Honest conversations about power, privilege, representation, and what they actually wanted from their leaders. Parents explained to their children why what they'd witnessed mattered. Teachers made mental notes to use the debate in their classes as an example of substantive discourse. Young people who had been cynical about politics found themselves reconsidering what was possible when someone who actually understood their lives stepped onto a stage. The most telling reactions came from ordinary people, the working-class families both candidates had spoken about. Their responses told the real story. "That's the first time I've heard a politician talk about my actual life," one woman posted. "Not about me as a voter they need. About me as a human being they see." A veteran wrote, "I've been told thank you for your service 1,000 times by politicians looking for a photo op." Jasmine Crockett is the first one who talked about what happens after we come home. That's the difference. A young man from a predominantly black neighborhood shared, "My whole life I've watched people who look like me get talked over or not talked about at all. Seeing someone who understands that experience stand on that stage and hold her ground, that meant something. That meant everything." These weren't carefully crafted political statements. They were raw, emotional responses from people who felt like they'd finally been seen, finally been heard. Meanwhile, Trump's usual strategy, after a difficult moment to flood the zone with confident proclamations of victory, seemed muted. His social media posts that night were fewer and more subdued than usual. His surrogates on cable news sounded uncertain. Because how do you spin what had happened? How do you claim victory when the most powerful moments belong to your opponent? How do you dismiss as fake news something millions watched unfold live, unfiltered, in real time? Some of Trump's most loyal supporters tried. They focused on style over substance, on personality over policy. They pointed to moments where he'd gotten applause. But even they seemed to know something significant had shifted. Others took a different approach. They pivoted to attacking Crockett personally, questioning her credentials, her right to even be on that stage with Trump. But that strategy backfired, because it only reinforced the very point Crockett had made that women, particularly women of color, have to fight for every inch of space they occupy in rooms of power. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Trump, who had built his brand on being a fighter, on never backing down, had been fundamentally challenged by someone who fought differently, who wielded truth as her weapon and authenticity as her armor. In the days that followed, political analysts would write countless pieces trying to decode what had happened. But they were missing the point, or at least missing the full picture. This wasn't just about who won a debate. It was about who won the argument, the deeper argument about what kind of leadership America needs, about whether lived experience matters as much as traditional credentials, about the difference between representing people and actually being one of them. Jasmine Crockett had walked onto that stage as a relatively unknown Congresswoman. She walked off as something else, a symbol of a kind of politics people had been hungry for, a reminder that the most powerful stories don't always come from the biggest stages, but from the smallest rooms where real people face real struggles. For Trump, the debate represented something he wasn't used to experiencing, a genuine challenge that he couldn't overcome with volume or charisma alone, a moment where his usual tactics not only failed, but backfired. He had entered believing in his own myth, convinced that his years in the spotlight would carry him through. He had issued that challenge with the casual confidence of someone who had never really been humbled, and in that miscalculation lay the entire story. Because Crockett hadn't come to play Trump's game. She came to change the game entirely, to redefine what winning looks like, to prove that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth with conviction. The debate had lasted just over an hour, but its impact would reverberate far longer, shaping conversations, shifting perspectives, and reminding people of something perhaps forgotten in the chaos of modern politics. That leadership isn't about who can shout the loudest, but about who can speak most clearly to the struggles of the people they serve. In coffee shops and barber shops, in church basements and union halls, in college dorms and retirement homes, people talked about what they'd witnessed. And the conversation turned personal, not about Trump or Crockett as celebrities, but about what their exchange had revealed about American democracy, about representation, about who gets to have power, and how they're expected to use it. Young black women, in particular, saw in Crockett's performance something that transcended politics. They saw someone who looked like them, standing toe-to-toe with one of the most powerful men in America, and not just holding her ground, but claiming her space with grace and strength. She didn't have to yell to be heard. One college student observed, she didn't have to change who she was. She brought her whole self and made the space accommodate her instead of the other way around. That's revolutionary. Teachers, social workers, nurses, public defenders, people in professions built on service, found in Crockett a validation of their own values. "She gets it," was a common refrain. She understands that real work happens away from the cameras. Even some of Trump's own supporters had to acknowledge something hadn't gone according to plan. "He's faced a lot of opponents," one longtime supporter admitted, "but he's never faced anyone quite like her. She wasn't trying to be him. She was playing a completely different game, and that threw him off." That analysis captured the essence of what made the debate remarkable. Crockett hadn't attempted to out-Trump Trump. She hadn't tried to match his bravado. She had simply been herself, grounded, honest, unflinching. And in being herself, in refusing to accept the terms Trump tried to set, she had done something numerous politicians before her had failed to do. She had gotten under his skin not by attacking him, but by presenting an alternative vision so compelling that his own approach looked hollow by comparison. The story of that debate became more than just a political moment. It became a cultural touchstone, a reference point in conversations about leadership, representation, and what it means to truly fight for people. In the weeks that followed, Crockett's words were quoted in sermons, in graduation speeches, in articles about the next generation of leadership. Her example was held up not just by political allies, but by people across the spectrum who recognized that something important had happened, something that transcended partisan divisions. "I will never forget who I'm fighting for." Those words, delivered with such quiet conviction, became a rallying cry for a movement that was less about political affiliation and more about demanding authenticity and accountability from those in power. Teachers printed out excerpts from the debate to use in their classrooms as teaching tools about effective communication, about the power of personal narrative, about how to stand firm in your truth, even when facing someone more powerful. Community organizers referenced the debate when talking about elevating voices from the grassroots, ensuring that people making decisions about communities actually understand those communities from the inside, not just as abstract policy problems. Young people, particularly young women of color who saw themselves in Crockett's story, found inspiration in her refusal to shrink herself to fit into spaces not designed for her, in her insistence on bringing her full self to the political arena. The debate had also sparked broader conversations about who gets to be considered credible, whose experiences count as legitimate qualifications for leadership. Crockett's background as a public defender, her working-class roots, her intimate knowledge of everyday struggles, these weren't just biographical details. They were the foundation of her authority, the source of her power, and that challenged conventional wisdom that had long dominated American politics, that the path to high office necessarily ran through elite institutions and certain professional backgrounds. Crockett represented a different path, one that valued lived experience and community connection as much as conventional credentials. For Donald Trump, the debate represented a rare moment of vulnerability. He had faced criticism before years of it, from every direction. But criticism is different from being genuinely challenged on your own terms, in your own arena, by someone who refuses to play by the rules you've set. Trump's brand had always been about winning, about being the strongest person in any room. Crockett hadn't beaten him by trying to be stronger in the way he defined strength. She had redefined what strength looks like, as calm in the face of aggression, as clarity in the face of confusion, as truth in the face of bluster. Some observers predicted the debate would be a turning point. Others were skeptical, arguing that one debate couldn't overcome partisan polarization. But perhaps both perspectives missed something important. Maybe the debate's significance wasn't in whether it changed who people voted for, but in what it revealed about what people were hungry for. Leaders who speak to them as human beings, not demographics. Politicians who understand their lives, not as abstract policy challenges, but as lived realities. Public servants who measure success, not by personal advancement, but by positive changes in people's actual lives. The night of the debate, Trump had walked onto that stage as the undisputed master of political performance, the man who had rewritten the rules of modern politics. He walked off having encountered something his playbook hadn't prepared him for. Someone who wasn't trying to play his game at all. Someone who represented a fundamentally different understanding of what leadership means and who it's supposed to serve. Jasmine Crockett had walked onto that stage as a relatively unknown figure nationally. She walked off, having introduced herself to the country in the most powerful way possible, not through slick ads or carefully staged appearances, but through raw, honest, unfiltered engagement with the most famous political figure of our time. She had proven that you don't need decades in the spotlight to speak with authority. You don't need millions of dollars to command respect. What you need is clarity about who you are and who you serve, courage to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, and unwavering commitment to putting others' needs before your own ego. The debate had started with Trump's challenge. You want a real debate? Let's go. It had ended with a different kind of answer than anyone expected. Not a political victory in the traditional sense, but something deeper. A demonstration of what it looks like when authentic experience confronts performative confidence, when service-minded leadership faces self-interested ambition. And in that demonstration lay a lesson extending far beyond the two individuals on that stage. It was about power, who has it, how they use it, whether they wield it for themselves or for others. It was about representation, the difference between speaking about people and speaking as one of them. It was about leadership, the distinction between commanding attention and earning trust. What this debate revealed goes far beyond just these two individuals. It showed us what's possible when someone brings truth, experience, and authentic purpose to the political arena. It reminded us why representation matters, having leaders who genuinely understand the struggles of the people they serve, because they've lived those struggles themselves. What moment from this debate resonated most deeply with you? Was it when Crockett talked about fighting from the bottom? Her words about accountability? Or simply seeing someone stand their ground with grace against power? The story of that debate will be told and retold, analyzed and reanalyzed, remembered and referenced for years to come. But its ultimate meaning will be determined not by political pundits, but by what it inspires in ordinary people who watched it unfold. Will it inspire more people from non-traditional backgrounds to run for office? Will it encourage voters to demand more authenticity from their leaders? Will it shift conversations about what qualifications matter most in those who hold power over our lives? These questions remain open, their answers still being written. But one thing is undeniable. On that night, something significant happened. A challenge was issued and accepted. A confrontation unfolded. And when it was over, everyone present had witnessed a masterclass in the difference between leadership as performance and leadership as service. Donald Trump had challenged Jasmine Crockett, thinking he could expose her inexperience, thinking he could dominate through force of personality, thinking he could win by making it about him. Instead, she had accepted his challenge and made it about something bigger, about the people who rarely get heard, about struggles that rarely get acknowledged, about leadership that measures success, not in headlines, but in lives changed, in problems solved, in people lifted up. He had regretted it by the fourth question. You could see it in his body language, hear it in his pauses, feel it in the energy shift. But by then, it was too late. The moment had passed. The demonstration had been made. The lesson had been taught. Jasmine Crockett had come to that debate as a relatively unknown Congresswoman. She left as something more, a symbol of possibility, a voice for the voiceless, a reminder that the most powerful people in any room aren't always the ones with the biggest platforms, but the ones with the clearest purpose and the courage to speak their truth. And for everyone who watched, who witnessed that exchange, who felt the weight of those words, one thing became crystal clear. We had witnessed something rare and important, something that would be remembered not just as a political moment, but as a human one, not just as a debate, but as a revelation. The challenge had been issued. The moment had been seized. And when the lights went down, the lesson remained. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't volume or fame or money or traditional power. Sometimes it's simply truth, spoken with clarity and conviction by someone who has earned the right to speak it. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Thank you so much for watching this entire story unfold with me. If this debate, this moment, this clash between two different visions of leadership moved you in any way, I want to hear about it. Hit that like button if Jasmine Crockett's performance inspired you. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of this story hit you the hardest. Was it her words about fighting from the bottom? Her definition of accountability? The moment when she said leaders should see the people, not just their own reflection? Subscribe to Celebrity Chronicles so you never miss stories like this. Stories about real moments, real courage, and real leadership. Share this video with someone who needs to see what it looks like when truth meets power, when authenticity confronts performance, when someone refuses to shrink themselves to fit into spaces not designed for them. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people, and that matters. Because stories like this, stories about standing firm in your truth, about speaking for those who can't speak for themselves, about leading with purpose instead of ego, these are the stories we need more of. So take a moment, leave your thoughts below, and let's keep this conversation going. What did this debate teach you about leadership, about representation, about what's possible when someone brings their whole, authentic self to the arena? I'm genuinely curious, and I read every single comment. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these stories. And thank you for being part of a community that believes words matter, truth matters, and leadership should be about service, not spectacle. Until next time, stay inspired, stay engaged, and keep demanding better from those who seek to lead us.